13 most brutal arena punishment in ancient Rome. It's worse than you think. The sand of the Colosseum floor is already dark with blood when they drag her out at noon. A mosaic of death painted in crimson and brown. Her name is Aurelia Tertia, and she is 23 years old, a freedwoman accused of poisoning her former master's wife in a fit of jealous rage. Though she has maintained her innocence through 3 days of preliminary torture that have left her unable to walk without assistance, her joints swollen and her skin bruised, the guards who hold her arms are not gentle. They do not need to be. The 50,000 Romans filling the seats above are finishing their midday meals, chatting with neighbors, barely glancing at the arena floor, where the morning's animal hunts have concluded and the afternoon's gladiatorial matches have not yet begun. This hour belongs to the condemned, the Noxii, those deemed unworthy of life or dignity. Aurelia can feel the heat of the sand through the thin shift they have left her, her only garment already torn from the handling, exposing her to the leering crowd. She can smell the blood and offal from the morning's kills, a metallic tang that coats the back of her throat. She can hear the casual conversation of spectators who have seen this so many times it no longer holds their full attention, discussing politics and prices while she prepares to die. She can see the other condemned being led out behind her, 7 men and 3 women, all scheduled to die in the next hour, through methods designed not merely to kill, but to entertain. She does not yet know which method has been assigned to her. The uncertainty is part of the torture. The magistrates who sentenced her did not specify. The arena officials who processed her this morning did not tell her. She will learn what is about to happen to her body only when it begins happening. The arena master, a heavy-set man named Decimus Valerius Festus, who has supervised these noon executions for 11 years and views them with the detachment of a butcher, consults his wax tablet and gestures toward Aurelia. 2 attendants approach carrying something that glints in the Mediterranean sun, a fabric that looks wet and heavy. It takes her a moment to understand what she is seeing. A garment made of linen that has been soaked in pitch and oil, designed to be placed over her body and then ignited. The tunica molesta, the troublesome shirt. She has heard of this punishment. Everyone in Rome has heard of it, whispered in marketplaces and shouted in threats. But hearing about fire and feeling it approach your skin are different things entirely. What happens next in that arena, and what happened to thousands of other condemned prisoners across 4 centuries of Roman entertainment, is what tonight's video will reveal in detail that no classroom ever taught you. What you are about to learn has been sanitized out of most historical education because the reality is too disturbing for general audiences. You know that Romans watched gladiators fight. You have seen the movies, the heroic combat, the dramatic thumbs up or thumbs down, the noble deaths of warriors who chose to fight. That version of Roman entertainment is real but radically incomplete, a Hollywood gloss over a charnel house. The gladiatorial matches were the main event, the sport. But before the main event came the executions. The systematic killing of condemned prisoners using methods designed to maximize both suffering and spectacle. These executions were not hidden shameful necessities. They were entertainment. They were scheduled. They were advertised. They were popular. Tonight, you will learn about 13 specific methods the Romans used to execute prisoners in the arena. Methods that went far beyond simple killing into territory that modern forensic psychologists classify as ritualized torture murder with mass participation. You will learn about the tunica molesta, the burning garment that transformed condemned prisoners into living torches while crowds watched and cheered. You will learn about the damnatio ad bestias, the condemnation to beasts that was not simply being thrown to lions, but an elaborate production involving dozens of animal species and staging designed to prolong death. You will learn about the ludi meridiani, the noon executions where prisoners were forced to kill each other in combat with no armor and no possibility of survival. You will learn about the mythological executions, the theatrical productions where condemned prisoners were forced to act out fatal myths, actually dying as Icarus fell from artificial wings, actually being torn apart as Orpheus was dismembered by Maenads, actually being violated as Pasiphae was mounted by the bull. Subscribe to Medieval Spirits if you want to understand what Roman civilization actually looked like behind the marble facades and philosophical treatises. Comment below telling me where in the world you are watching from, because Aurelia is standing in that arena with the pitch-soaked garment approaching her body. And I am going to tell you exactly what happened next, and what happened to thousands of others who died in ways that the Roman crowds considered appropriate entertainment for an afternoon at the games. Let us begin with the flames. The burning garment was not a quick death, it was an agonizing performance. It was designed to be slow, to be visible, to be theatrical in ways that satisfied audiences who had grown sophisticated in their tastes for suffering. The tunic itself was constructed from cheap linen, the kind used for slaves' clothing, soaked thoroughly in pitch, resin, and animal fat, a chemical cocktail designed to adhere to skin. When ignited, this combination burned slowly, rather than flash combusting, producing flames that consumed the victim over a period of 10 to 15 minutes, rather than killing through shock within seconds. The condemned prisoner was dressed in the tunic while it was still unlit, pulled over the head, tied at the waist to prevent removal, sometimes secured at wrists and ankles to posts that would hold the victim upright as the flames did their work. The ignition was itself theatrical, a choreographed moment. Attendants approached with torches from multiple directions, lighting the garment at several points simultaneously so the flames would spread evenly, enveloping the victim in a cage of fire. Aurelia Tertia experienced this process on an afternoon in approximately 115 of the Common Era during the reign of Trajan. The administrative records that survive from this period, fragments preserved in later compilations, describe her case in clinical terms. Aurelia Tertia, freedwoman, convicted of beneficium against Claudia Marcella, wife of Gaius Petronius Arbiter, sentenced to arena execution. Method assigned, crematio per tunicam. Execution confirmed by arena physician at the 7th hour. The record does not describe her screaming, a sound that would have echoed off the stone tiers. It does not describe the smell of burning flesh that witnesses reported could reach the upper tiers of the amphitheater, a sickeningly sweet odor that lingered for days. It does not describe how long she remained conscious as the flames consumed her, though medical experts who have analyzed these execution methods estimate that victims remained aware for between 3 and 8 minutes, depending on how the flames spread. What the record does note is that her execution was well received by the crowd, a notation that appears frequently in arena administration documents, indicating that the death had provided satisfactory entertainment value. The philosopher Seneca, writing approximately 60 years before Aurelia's death, described the noon executions he witnessed. I happened to return home at midday, expecting rest and relaxation after the morning's entertainments. Instead, I found something quite different. The morning fights had been merciful by comparison. Now all pretense was stripped away. The men had no armor. Their bodies were completely exposed to every blow. The crowd preferred this to the regular matches. And why not? There was no helmet to deflect the sword, no shield to block the thrust. Who needs skill when you have condemned criminals killing each other? Seneca was describing the combat executions, but his observations about crowd preferences apply equally to the burning. The Romans had developed tastes for death that was visible, prolonged, and unobstructed by the protections that made gladiatorial combat survivable. The tunica molesta was used not only in arenas, but also in private spectacles hosted by emperors. Nero famously used condemned Christians as human torches to illuminate his gardens during evening parties, the burning garments providing light by which guests could dine and socialize. Tacitus describes one such evening. To suppress this rumor, Nero fabricated scapegoats and punished with every refinement the notoriously depraved Christians. their deaths were made farcical. Dressed in wild animal skins, they were torn to pieces by dogs, or crucified, or made into torches to be ignited after dark as substitutes for daylight. Nero provided his gardens for the spectacle and exhibited displays in the circus, mixing with the crowd or mounted on a chariot dressed as a charioteer. The Christians dying as human torches were experiencing the same method applied to Aurelia Tertia. The slow combustion of the pitch-soaked garment, the prolonged consciousness, the theatrical presentation of suffering as entertainment. Modern burn specialists who have analyzed Roman execution methods estimate that approximately 70% of tunica molesta victims died from shock and fluid loss rather than direct flame damage, their bodies shutting down from the trauma before the fire could complete its work. The remaining 30% died from asphyxiation as the flames consumed the oxygen around their faces, or from organ failure as their core temperature rose beyond survivable levels. None of these deaths were quick. All of them were public, and all of them were considered appropriate entertainment for Roman citizens spending an afternoon at the games. The condemnation to beasts was Rome's most famous arena execution, but what most people imagine when they hear this phrase is drastically simpler than the reality. The popular image is of prisoners being thrown to lions, dying quickly in the jaws of predators. The actual practice was far more elaborate, involving multiple animal species, staged scenarios, and timing designed to extend death over significant periods. A man named Publius Aelius Fortunatus experienced this elaboration in approximately 177 of the Common Era during the reign of Marcus Aurelius. He was 31 years old, a merchant convicted of fraud and theft against the imperial treasury, crimes that merited public execution rather than simple imprisonment. The administrative records describe his sentence. Publius Aelius Fortunatus, citizen, convicted of peculatus and furtum against the fiscus, sentenced to damnatio ad bestias in the Flavian amphitheater. Animals assigned: bears, 3 leopards, 2 wild dogs, pack of 12. Staging: bound to stake with extended exposure intervals. The phrase extended exposure intervals reveals the essential cruelty of the method. Fortunatus was not thrown to animals and killed immediately. He was bound to a stake in the center of the arena, and animals were released one species at a time, with intervals between releases that allowed the crowd to observe his injuries before the next assault began. The first release was the wild dogs, chosen because they tended to bite and tear at extremities rather than attacking vital organs. The dogs were trained to approach condemned prisoners and inflict damage without killing quickly. They targeted hands, feet, faces, areas that bled spectacularly but did not cause immediate death. After approximately 15 minutes, the dogs were recalled, and Fortunatus was left bleeding and exposed, while attendants repositioned the staging for the next phase. The crowd used this interval to comment on his injuries, to place bets on how long he would survive, to eat and drink and socialize. The leopards came next. Unlike the dogs, leopards typically attacked with killing intent, but a prisoner already weakened by blood loss and shock was less able to trigger the predatory response that led to quick, killing bites. The leopards circled, struck, withdrew, struck again. The attacks continued for approximately 20 minutes before the leopards were recalled. The bears were saved for the final phase. By the time they were released, Fortunatus had been in the arena for over an hour, had lost significant blood, and was barely conscious. The bears' attacks were the most violent, but also the most merciful. Their massive size and strength meant they were capable of killing even weakened prey relatively quickly. Fortunatus died approximately 90 minutes after entering the arena. His death was recorded as satisfactory in the administrative records, meaning the crowd had been entertained, the execution had proceeded according to schedule, and no disruptions had occurred. The physician, Galen, who witnessed numerous arena executions during his time in Rome, described the medical realities. The beasts do not kill cleanly as soldiers do. They tear and rend without purpose, damaging flesh in ways that cause maximum bleeding without immediately fatal injury. I have seen men survive the first assault and the second, and sometimes the third, their bodies accumulating injuries that would each be survivable alone, but which together exceed what the human frame can endure. The death comes from exhaustion as much as from any single wound. The body simply ceases to function under the accumulated damage. Different animal species were assigned to different categories of criminals. Lions were typically reserved for the most serious offenses: treason, parricide, crimes that offended Roman sensibilities at the deepest level. Bears and leopards were assigned to serious but less symbolic crimes. Dogs and wild boars were used for lesser offenses, or for prisoners who were being executed in groups. The staging was equally variable. Some prisoners were bound to stakes, as Fortunatus was. Some were placed on elevated platforms that animals had to climb to reach. Some were given ineffective weapons: wooden swords, broken spears that provided the illusion of combat while ensuring the prisoner could not actually defend themselves. Some were dressed in costumes that made them represent mythological figures or enemies of Rome. The numbers were staggering. During the inaugural games of the Colosseum in 80 of the Common Era, approximately 9,000 animals were killed over 100 days of entertainment. Many of these animals were killed by professional hunters in morning spectacles, but a significant portion were used in executions that could consume dozens of animals per condemned prisoner, depending on how elaborate the staging was designed to be. The noon executions occupied a specific slot in the arena schedule, after the morning animal hunts, before the afternoon gladiatorial matches. This was considered the least prestigious time period, when many spectators left to eat lunch and only the most dedicated remained to watch. But those who remained saw something different from the main events. They saw condemned prisoners forced to kill each other with no armor, no training, and no possibility of survival. A woman named Licinia Sabina was scheduled for the noon executions in approximately 143 of the Common Era. She was 26 years old, a slave convicted of murdering her owner during an attempted escape. The penalty for slaves who killed their masters was death, but not simple death, exemplary death. Death that would remind other slaves of the consequences of resistance. The ludi meridiani followed a simple format. Condemned prisoners were paired against each other. Both were given weapons, usually swords, sometimes spears or clubs, but neither was given armor, shields, or any protective equipment. They were required to fight until one of them was dead. The survivor was then immediately paired against another condemned prisoner, fighting again until death occurred. The process continued until all scheduled prisoners had been killed. The administrative record for Licinia Sabina's execution reads: Licinia Sabina, slave of Marcus Aurelius Cotta, convicted of homicidium of her master, sentenced to ludi meridiani, paired first against Gaius Vettius, convicted of latrocinium, whom she killed after 4 minutes of combat, paired second against Sextus Pomponius, convicted of peculatus, by whom she was killed after 7 minutes of combat. Body confirmed by arena physician. Disposal standard. The dry administrative language conceals what actually happened. Licinia was forced to kill another human being, a man she did not know who had committed property crimes unrelated to violence, using a sword she had never been trained to use. After killing him, while still covered in his blood, while still processing the trauma of having ended a human life, she was immediately confronted by another condemned prisoner who killed her in turn. Seneca's description of these noon executions remains the most vivid ancient account. In the morning, men are thrown to lions and bears. At noon, they are thrown to the spectators themselves. The crowd demands that the slayer be thrown to those who in turn will slay him, and they detain the victor for another slaughter. The outcome for the combatants is always death. Fire and sword are used to drive the combatants together. This goes on while the arena is empty of spectators, but one of them was a highway robber. He killed a man. What of it? Because he killed, He deserved this punishment. But what have you done, poor wretch, that you should deserve to watch it? The phrase, fire and sword, are used to drive the combatants together, reveals a crucial detail. Condemned prisoners who refused to fight, who tried to surrender, who tried to run, who simply stood passively, were forced into combat by arena attendants armed with hot irons and whips. There was no escape through passivity. The only escape was death. And death could only come through combat. The psychological dimension of this execution method was as deliberate as the physical. The condemned were forced to become killers before they became victims. They were forced to participate in their own dehumanization, to shed blood with their own hands before their own blood was shed. The Romans called them ludi fatales, or fatal charades, theatrical productions in which condemned prisoners were forced to act out scenes from mythology, with the crucial difference that the deaths portrayed were real. A man named Marcus Ulpius Stephanus experienced this form of execution in approximately 98 of the Common Era, during the reign of Nerva. He was 28 years old, a freedman convicted of theft from a temple, a crime classified as sacrilege that merited particularly elaborate punishment. The myth assigned to him was the story of Orpheus, the legendary musician who descended to the underworld to rescue his wife, and was later torn apart by Maenads, the frenzied female followers of Dionysus. The staging was elaborate. A backdrop had been constructed to represent a forest scene. Musicians played instruments that evoked the legendary music of Orpheus. Stephanus was dressed in a costume that identified him as the mythological figure, a lyre strapped to his back, a laurel crown on his head, robes that made him look like a poet from legend. The animals that would represent the Maenads were not released immediately. First, Stephanus was required to pretend to play the lyre, to enact scenes from the Orpheus legend, to provide the theatrical prelude that the crowd expected before the fatal conclusion. Only after the theatrical portion was complete did the arena attendants release the bear that had been trained to attack human figures. The poet Martial, who witnessed numerous mythological executions during his time in Rome, described several in his epigrams. What before was performed in myth is now performed in the arena. Pasiphae really did mate with a Dictaean bull. Believe it. We have seen it. Antiquity should not be incredulous any longer. The arena makes real whatever fame has sung. Laureolus, hanging on no pretend cross, gave up his vitals to a Caledonian bear. His lacerated limbs lived on, dripping gore, and in all his body there was no body left. The reference to Laureolus describes another mythological execution, this one reenacting the death of a legendary bandit who was crucified and then torn apart by wild animals. The condemned prisoner was actually crucified on a cross constructed for the arena, and then actually torn apart by a bear while still alive on the cross. The Pasiphae reference describes what was considered the most disturbing of the mythological executions, the reenactment of the myth in which Queen Pasiphae mated with a bull and conceived the Minotaur. In the arena version, condemned women were placed in wooden devices designed to facilitate actual coupling with bulls. Whether the women survived this assault varied. The purpose was the spectacle rather than the specific outcome. A woman named Volumnia Cytheris was subjected to this execution in approximately 112 of the Common Era. The burning at the stake, or crematio, was distinct from the tunica molesta in method and duration. Where the burning garment killed through fire spreading across the body, the crematio killed through sustained exposure to flames that approached the body from below. A man named Lucius Varius Ambustus experienced this execution in approximately 203 of the Common Era during the reign of Septimius Severus. He was 41 years old, a Roman citizen convicted of arson that had killed multiple people, a crime that Roman law considered particularly appropriate for death by fire. The staging for crematio was standardized by the imperial period. The condemned was bound to a wooden stake set in the center of the arena floor. Combustible materials, wood, straw, dried brush were piled around the base of the stake, reaching approximately to waist height. The materials were ignited, and the condemned died as the flames rose to consume first their lower body, then their torso, then finally their head and face. The duration of this death was longer than the tunica molesta. Estimates based on witness accounts suggest between 20 and 45 minutes from ignition to death, depending on how the materials were arranged and how quickly the flames spread. The elephant execution was considered a mark of particular imperial displeasure, reserved for criminals whose offenses had personally insulted the emperor, or whose deaths the emperor wished to witness personally. A woman named Flavia Domitilla experienced this execution in approximately 95 of the Common Era during the reign of Domitian. She was approximately 30 years old, a member of the imperial family itself, niece of the Emperor Vespasian and first cousin of Domitian. Her crime was conversion to Judaism or Christianity. The sources are unclear which Domitian interpreted as a personal betrayal of the family and the state religion. The elephant execution worked through crushing. The condemned was placed on the arena floor, either bound and immobile or chained in a way that allowed limited movement. A trained elephant was then directed to step on the condemned person, crushing them under its weight. The cruelty of this method lay in its variability. Elephants could be trained to crush quickly, a single step on the chest or head that ended life within seconds, or they could be trained to crush slowly, stepping on limbs first, then the pelvis, then the lower torso, working upward toward vital organs over a period of minutes, while the condemned remained conscious and screaming. The Naumachia, the staged naval battle, is often remembered as a spectacular entertainment rather than an execution method. But for the condemned prisoners who crewed the ships, it was simply another way to die in the arena. A man named Gaius Sergius Bassus experienced this execution in approximately 52 of the Common Era during the reign of Claudius. He was 33 years old, a sailor convicted of mutiny against his captain, a crime that Roman military law punished with death. His execution was scheduled for one of the major Naumachiae staged on the artificial lake that Claudius had constructed specifically for naval entertainments. The Naumachia featured ships crewed entirely by condemned prisoners. These prisoners were given basic weapons, swords, spears, sometimes bows, and instructed to fight the crews of opposing ships. The battle continued until one side was entirely killed or drowned. Survivors from the winning side were typically executed afterward, either immediately in the water or later in traditional arena methods. The scale of these events was enormous. The Naumachia, staged by Claudius in 52, featured approximately 19,000 condemned prisoners divided between two fleets. The burial in sand was a method used specifically in amphitheaters, located in desert or semi-arid regions, where sand was abundant and the heat intensified the suffering of the condemned. A woman named Septimia Zosime experienced this execution in approximately 237 of the Common Era in the amphitheater at Thysdrus in Roman Africa, modern-day El Jem, Tunisia. She was 29 years old, a slave convicted of theft from her master, a crime that merited death under Roman law, but was considered insufficiently serious for the more elaborate execution methods. The sand burial was simple in concept, but prolonged in execution. The condemned was buried in the arena sand up to the neck, with only the head exposed. They were then left in the sun while the games continued around them. Death came from dehydration, heat exhaustion, or animal attack, whichever arrived first. The condemned sewn into animal hides and thrown to trained dogs was a method that combined elements of the beast execution with additional psychological and physical torment. A man named Publius Aurelius Faustus experienced this execution in approximately 161 of the Common Era during the reign of Marcus Aurelius. He was 37 years old, a citizen convicted of multiple counts of robbery and murder. Crimes serious enough to warrant elaborate execution, but not significant enough to merit the most prestigious method. The process began with the condemned being stripped and sewn into freshly flayed animal skins, typically wolf or dog skins, chosen because the smell would trigger aggression in the trained dogs that would perform the actual killing. The public use of the rack, the equuleus or little horse, transformed a torture device into an execution method by extending its use until the victim died from the injuries inflicted. A woman named Claudia Felicitas experienced this execution in approximately 250 of the Common Era during the persecution of Christians under the Emperor Decius. She was 32 years old, a Christian who had refused to sacrifice to Roman gods despite multiple demands. Her public death was intended both as punishment and as a warning to other Christians who might consider similar resistance. The rack in its arena form was a wooden frame designed to stretch the human body by pulling the limbs in opposite directions. The condemned was bound at wrists and ankles, and mechanisms, typically rollers, turned by attendants gradually increased the tension until joints dislocated, muscles tore, and eventually, the spine or limbs separated entirely. The duration of this death depended entirely on how quickly the attendants turned the mechanisms. A quick death might take only minutes. A prolonged death might take hours. The furca, the wooden fork, was a device used primarily for slaves, but occasionally employed in arena executions for dramatic effect. A man named Titus Flavius Hermeros experienced this execution in approximately 123 of the Common Era during the reign of Hadrian. He was 25 years old, a slave convicted of striking his master during a dispute, a crime that under Roman law was punishable by death without the protections afforded to citizens. The furca was a Y-shaped wooden yoke placed around the neck, with the arms extended along the branches and bound in place. The condemned could walk while wearing the furca, but could not use their arms, could not defend themselves, and could not remove the device without assistance. In arena use, the furca served as a restraint that made the condemned helpless, while various punishments were inflicted. The wearer might be beaten with rods while unable to shield themselves. They might be attacked by animals while unable to fight back. They might be burned, cut, or otherwise tortured, while the wooden frame held them in position for whatever was being done. The throwing of condemned prisoners from heights, precipitatio, was used both as a civil execution method and as an arena spectacle, particularly when staging the deaths of mythological figures who died by falling. A woman named Julia Priscilla experienced this execution in approximately 147 of the Common Era. She was 19 years old, convicted of poisoning multiple members of a household where she worked as a servant. The scale of her alleged crimes, 4 deaths, attributed to her warranted elaborate public execution. The arena staging for precipitatio involved the construction of elevated platforms from which the condemned would be thrown. The height varied, depending on the desired effect. Higher platforms produced more spectacular falls, but quicker deaths, while lower platforms might result in severe injuries that did not immediately kill, allowing for further punishment of the survivor. The mythological framing often used was the death of Icarus, the boy who flew too close to the sun and fell when his wax wings melted. The condemned would be dressed in costumes that included artificial wings raised to the platform and thrown while spectators watched them fall. The most disturbing category of arena execution involved condemned women being subjected to sexual assault as part of their public death, methods that combined violation with killing in ways designed to satisfy the darkest appetites of Roman crowds. A woman named Acte Alexandrina experienced this execution in approximately 109 of the Common Era during the reign of Trajan. She was 24 years old, a slave convicted of theft and prostitution, crimes that in combination apparently warranted execution methods that emphasize the sexual nature of her alleged offenses. The arena staging for sexual executions varied. Some involved human perpetrators, condemned male criminals who were offered reduced sentences in exchange for assaulting female prisoners publicly. Some involved animals, the Pasiphae executions described earlier, in which women were placed in devices that facilitated assault by bulls or other large animals. Some involved objects, wooden implements used to violate women before they were killed through other methods. The administrative record for Acti Alexandrina reads, Acti Alexandrina, slave, convicted of furtum and lenocinium, sentenced to arena execution. Method, pasiphae staging with subsequent animal exposure. Staging completed at the 4th hour. Death from animal exposure confirmed at the 5th hour. Modern archaeological and forensic research has provided physical evidence for many of these execution methods. Excavations at amphitheater sites throughout the former Roman Empire have uncovered human remains that show evidence of execution trauma. At the amphitheater in Chester, England, forensic analysis of bones revealed individuals who had been attacked by large carnivores' tooth marks consistent with lions and bears. At Ephesus, Turkey, skeletal remains showed fracture patterns consistent with precipitatio from heights. At Rome itself, excavations near the Colosseum have uncovered bone fragments with burning damage, cuts from bladed weapons, and other indicators of violent death. The scale of these findings, combined with administrative records and literary sources, allows modern historians to estimate that the Roman arena system killed between 200,000 and 400,000 people over its 4-century history, deaths that occurred in the Colosseum and in hundreds of provincial Sixtan amphitheaters scattered across 3 continents. This is what the Roman arena actually was. Not gladiators fighting for honor, not dramatic thumbs up and thumbs down. An execution industry that killed hundreds of thousands of people using methods designed to maximize suffering and spectacle. A system that transformed human beings into entertainment products, their deaths rated for crowd reception, their suffering optimized for viewing satisfaction. If you want to explore more topics on history and uncover the untold stories of the past with medieval spirits, make sure to like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell for more insights.